In the episode 21, I discussed about a cryptid that is said to be still lurking around in modern Korea called Jangsan-bum. I do recommend you to check the episode for more details if you missed it. The link's in the description and at the corner of the screen as usual. But to sum it up, several witness accounts about a mystery creature started popping up on the internet in the late 2000s. There were certain similarities in their description of the creature, sizable as a big cat, white fur, and lightning speed, and people quickly nicknamed it as Jangsan-bum after the mountain in Busan in which the mystery creature was said to be first witnessed. Soon further witness accounts were added, its location and timeline going farther and wider, and it eventually became one of the best-known urban myths in the modern time, so much so several cartoons and a film were created taking the motif of Jangsan-bum. As I discussed in the first episode about Jangsan-bum, it is most likely not true, or at least not in the way it has been established in the internet community. The biggest reason of the argument is there are no true historical accounts in line with the said characters of Jangsan-bum. An animal or cryptid of such presence and unique characters would not have been omitted if not in the formal historical account, at least in folklores. But all the accounts about Jangsan-bum can only be traced back to late 2000s. There are some arguing that there are historical accounts describing Jangsan-bum, but they are either just one-off incident, inconsistent with a modern description of Jangsan-bum, or simply relies on the ambiguity of the word bum. A bum would have usually meant tiger, but it was also used to call other types of big predatory cats, such as leopards or tomcat. Using this point, some people try to argue the history accounts about a bum are not actually about tigers, but the mysterious Jangsan-bum. But there aren't real proof to back that argument. So I picked 4 more stories about Jangsan-bum that floats around the internet and ordered in the way to follow the progress of how a modern myth was born. The first story is a contemporary account and from Busan City, as were most other first accounts of Jangsan-bum on internet. And it's a simple witness account without an attempt to describe any further details than a vague big white beast that moves fast. Basically, it's one of the stories before the more elaborate characters of Jangsan-bum were established in the public mind. The second account is a more historic one, which was used to back up the historic validity of Jangsan-bum's presence. You notice the writer intentionally used the ambiguous word bum, avoiding to specify it as tiger or Jangsan-bum. But the account is all in line with the historic description of tiger and Changui, the subject I discussed in detail in the previous episode, links in the description and at the corner. Tiger was a big problem in Korea well into early 20th century, and not a small number of people were killed by the beast. Changui is the spirit of victims who are killed and eaten by a tiger. They are said to be enslaved to the tiger and guide the beast to further human praise. So this second story is an attempt to use the legit folklore about tiger to back up the modern myth. The third story tells definitely more complex context than the first accounts. Now it pushes back in the earlier generation and seamlessly integrates the established character of Jangsan-bum, its said physical attributes that resembles the elegance of a lady. But it still leaves it rather ambiguous by avoiding calling it straight Jangsan-bum or giving more direct descriptions. The fourth and the last story is the most elaborate story about Jangsan-bum I came across on the internet. It not only suggests the historic quality as an account from a senior family member, but fuses by now well-established characters of Jangsan-bum with a historic account of Tiger and Changui to create richer and more dramatic story. I wouldn't argue here whether Jangsan-bum really exists or not. The very first witness accounts about a big white beast could be innocent and true, but I would argue what followed afterwards, the elaborate characters and stories from the past, are most likely the result of the collective imagination in the internet age. It is an interesting case study to see how a modern myth or possibly a conspiracy theory could be born, grow over time, and become an established element in the general culture. So here are 4 stories from Korea that may or may not be about the cryptid Jangsan-bum. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by host, Anthony. One summer a few years ago, I planned to go swimming with a friend to Haeundae Beach, Busan. My parents were unavailable that day, so my friend's mom took us. The sun was shining and we had a good fun riding waves on our swim rings. But probably a bit over an hour later, I started feeling dizzy. Noticing my condition, my friend pushed me back on the beach. I felt gradually worse, dizzy and fainting. Friend's mom decided to call it a day, and I lied down on the back seat all the way to friend's home. By the time we arrived at their apartment, I was getting fever and headaches too. Friend's mom put wet towels over me, while my silly friend next to her constantly babbling, "Is she gonna die, Mom? Shouldn't we call an ambulance? Don't die!" and so on. I was laid in their living room in front of the big balcony door. For a while my delirious eyes looked up the blue sky, and then moved down to the mountain. It was then when I saw something moving in a flashing speed. Its light color clearly stood out among the dark summer color of foliage around. The mountain was a bit away across a highway, and I couldn't entirely trust my own hazy state of mind, but I sensed it wasn't a human, more like some kind of white animal. I crawled over to the balcony to have a closer look. My friend joined me, asking what I was looking. I pointed the mountain, and just then that white thing moved again in its flashing speed. "Is that a dog?" my friend said. But no, it was too big and too elongated in its shape to be a dog. And the way it ran was definitely not that of a dog. It was actually more crawling than running. Nevertheless, incredibly fast. Even my friend mumbled despite of herself, "Wow, so fast!" I had never seen anything like it nor experienced anything paranormal before. I suggested that we should go to the mountain to investigate ourselves. But, well, my condition was no way fit enough for that. As a matter of fact, I was eventually brought to the hospital and diagnosed to have got a heat stroke. It was already dark when we came back after 2 hours of injection, drips and whatnot, and by then impossible to go out to the mountain. It is only later that I read about the mystery animal witnessed around Jangsan in Busan. If that stories be true, I must say it was lucky that I could not go out to the mountain that day. Who knows if I would be still alive today had I really encountered it then. As a project in my university course, I once went out on a field trip to collect folklores. It was in a small village tucked away in a mountainous terrain. Traditionally, when people see some mystery blue lights floating around, they called it dokebi fire in most other regions. But interestingly, in this village, people called it Pom or tiger fire. I heard there was a man who encountered a tiger back in the days, so paid a visit to his home. The man himself had already passed away, and only his widow and daughter-in-law lived there. Well, no wonder, considering the daughter-in-law was already in her 70s herself. Fortunately, she still remembered what her late father-in-law recounted. In his time, when a person went missing in the mountain, people assumed it was a Pom's doing. One day he was on his way back from the market. On the trail in the mountain, he was stopped by somebody calling his name. He turned around to find a fellow villager. He said he needed an assistant because he broke his leg. So he was about to comply until he realized it's so odd that the supposedly wounded man could stand so straight. Only then he remembered that the villager was rumored to have gone missing in the mountain a few weeks ago. People used to say those who were killed and eaten by a Pom becomes enslaved by the beast. He started backing up, and the next moment he could not see the villager anymore, but two glowing blue lights. They seemed to glare at him before turned away and disappeared into the dense forest. He realized how close it was he too could have been the victim of Pom's lure. My mother is from a humble peasant family. Her family home was a little cottage, as most people's were in her village. In one small room slept 5 of her family members, her parents, her third sister, younger brother, and herself. The older of the siblings were away in bigger towns, either to study or work. One day, Mom woke up in the middle of the night. It wasn't anything she heard, but she just felt something wasn't right even in her sleep. When her drowsy eyes managed to focus in the dark, what she saw was her father sitting in front of the door, making a circling motion with a candle in his hand. She could not understand the reason of his weird behavior, but the tension in the air was enough to keep her quiet and watch on. But soon the little girl that my mom then was got cramps in her feet, felt like peeing and thirsty all at the same time. She still could not dare to call for her dad, deadly focusing whatever he was doing. She just fidgeted her legs to release the cramps at least, and only then realized that there was a faint shadow of somebody sitting right the other side of the paper door, shone against the light of the full moon. And her dad was shining the candlelight about where its head should be. It made my mom forget her thirst or cramps. Then the thing seemed standing up. She could hear the creaking of the wooden floor as it slowly crawled around in front of the door. Suddenly it lowered its body, and Mom saw its shadow getting hazy as it moved away. Her dad stopped circling the candlelight. He was clearly all ears to figure out its next move. For a few intense seconds, all she could hear was the hot candle wax dripping on the floor, but soon heard ever so faint crunch noise from the gravel in the yard. The shadow of the thing sitting down and standing up resembled that of a person, but now its footsteps were clearly from more than 2 feet. And then its shadow appeared over the door, standing straight. It then once again sat in front of the door, elegantly. Her dad, in turn, hurriedly resumed circling the candlelight over where its head should be. The tense moment dragged on a while, and suddenly the thing outside lifted its hand and gently scratched over the paper door. For its unexpected move, she saw her dad startled and his hand holding the candle visibly shaking. So far, she was alarmed for the mystery presence, but now the sudden realization it could come inside the room made a sense of danger absolutely tangible. Now it was using all its fingers over the paper, making its creepy scratch noise more threatening. How much longer could that thin paper withstand it, Mom wondered. In between, there was occasional sound of it breathing, and it was rough and deep as from a big beast. Suddenly her dad said in a low but stern voice, "Go back to sleep." Mom lied down again, but naturally could not sleep. She saw her dad keeping his position till dawn broke, long after that thing had disappeared. Mom never saw what it really was, and Grandpa never mentioned about it either. But the many scratch marks on the door outside certainly proved it wasn't just a dream. Mom said about the time of the incident, there had been a widespread fear in the area about kids going missing under mysterious circumstances. Coincidence? This is a story my late uncle used to recount. He was born in what is now a part of North Korea. Apparently his family was rich, a huge landowner in the area. They were also well known for their generosity, and that reputation saved them and let them escape safely even during the scary purging at the beginning of the communistic regime in North Korea. When he was young, livestock often went missing in the village. People would find long, fine white hair left behind in the empty barns. They suspected a white tiger and asked the authority for help. A few hunters were brought in, and after a 2 months long tracing and pursuing, they hunted down a few wild boars, a bear, and 2 tigers. The villagers celebrated their long nuisances were gone and threw a party, feasting on the meat of the hunted animals. My uncle, then but a young boy, enjoyed the festivity and loaded himself with food. When he was back home, he found his father and some village elites discussing something serious with a master hunter. Uncle was too tired to focus on what they were talking about, but he did catch them saying, "The tiger caught are not the one we are after. The white hair found are too long and fine for a tiger. It must be Tom, not an ordinary tiger." Sometime later, Uncle tagged along with his uncle to the town's market. By the time they bought a cow and other things and were reaching back to the village, it was already at night. A full moon was on and the night air was mild. My uncle dozed off on the bullock cart. He woke up with an urgent shake from his uncle. His uncle's face was ashen and his hand holding the hunting rifle was visibly shaking. My uncle was about to ask what was wrong, but his uncle covered his mouth and whispered, "Shh, if you want to live, be quiet, not a sound." His uncle in his time was a renowned hunter, and seeing him so scared and tense signaled it was something really serious. While he kept quiet and motionless on the cart, His uncle kept watching around, super alerted and with his rifle tightly in his hands. The cow they bought that day must have sensed something terrifying too, and shitted and pissed itself on the spot. And then he doesn't remember how much time had passed. When he got around by violent shaking, he was on his uncle's back, who was running towards the village. On the other side of the road, could he see his dad and other villagers running towards with torchlights? The uncle handed his young nephew to his father and said between hard panting, "I could not save the cow. Sorry." To which his father replied, "No matter as long as you two are safe. Haven't you seen Mr. Kang?" His uncle glanced over my uncle and said, "Let's put the boy to bed first." It took a few years till he got to learn the full story as of what had happened that night. When he asked his uncle, he drew long from his pipe a few times before he finally opened his mouth with a deep sigh. "While you were dozing off on the cot, I decided to make a short break and lighted my pipe. Then I saw Mr. Kang, the herbalist, running. He was in a state. His clothes were torn, his hat and shoes were missing. He screamed to help him and save him. I could see something terrible was happening, so I picked up my rifle from the back of the cart. And when I turned around again, Mr. Kang was gone. In that short few seconds of time, I hopped off the cart and looked around. Yes, it was full moon that night. I could see shadow of something swaying, and when I looked up, Mr. Kang was dangling on the branches of a tree, and on top of his body was that white thing, glaring its blue eyes at me. I instantly felt threat for my life, so I aimed up my rifle at it. I'm not sure for how long. Cold sweat pouring down from my forehead got into my eyes, stinging them, and I shut my eyes for a second to squeeze sweat out. When I opened my eyes again, it wasn't there anymore. Neither Mr. Kang. That's when I woke you up. But I could sense he was still watching us. That chilling, sticky stare like that of a tiger looking at its prey. And oh, even more intense than that. I kept watching out around the cart, but soon realized I had to do something if to save both of our lives. So I let the cow loose and let it run, and I ran to the opposite direction with you on my back. I heard loud screams of the cow, quickly fading into silence from my back. My instinct was telling me we should be next target, and I sprinted even harder. Then I heard Mr. Kang's voice calling me. His voice was so tragic, so heart-wrenching. Only then I could be finally assured we were chased by a pom. My legs were giving up on me by then, but I had to think about little you on my back. I kept running. The voice of Mr. Kang faded, but then I could hear rustling noises behind me getting closer and closer until it came from right next to us. I thought it was over. But fortunately, we met your father and villagers just in time, and we were saved. I asked your dad the next day how he knew about the situation and came for us. He said he looked out the view of the mountain after dinner and saw some blue lights flaring and moving towards the village. So he gathered some servants and ran a little patrol around the town under the torchlight. Soon they ran into Mrs. Kang, crying for help. A Pom attacked their cottage and took away their baby, and Mr. Kang rushed out to catch it. So they called up a few more guys in the village and were searching for Mr. Kang when we met them. The search team carried on into the next day, only to find Mr. Kang near the valley. Just his upper body there was. Neither his lower body nor the baby were ever found. We blocked the way into the mountain for a while afterwards, but rumors were rampant that people saw blue lights floating around the mountain at night. And that was the last time his uncle mentioned about the day. The rumor and fear about Pom carried on, but as my uncle fled to Busan during the Korean War, he had of course no idea whatever happened to Pom or the village people afterwards. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. I guess this might be the last time I deal with the subject of Jangsan-bum, unless some more interesting news stories or even a proof that validates the historic presence of Jangsan-bum pops out. I wonder if there's a new myth, as in the case of Jangsan-bum, in your countries too? Not just an individual account that came and went, but something that gripped the imagination of the general public. Do let me know if you know one. If you enjoyed my work, please give my little channel a boost by clicking the like and notification button, leaving me a comment, and subscribing to my channel. Whether you are a general fan of weird and curious stories or specifically interested in Korean culture, I'm sure my channel had something to offer. Until the next, stay safe and take care.